Hello friends, this is lesson number 34 in the series of criticism in English literature. In the previous lesson we discussed I.A. Richards, and now in this lesson, as the forerunner of new criticism, we have the name Cleanth Brooks. He was born in the year 1906 and died 1994. He was an American critic. So remember, I.A. Richard was a British scholar and Cleanth Brooks is an American critic. So now we'll discuss important concepts given by him in new criticism. So the first, there is a work by him, The Language of Paradox. It was published in the year 1956. And in this work, he gives the concept of paradox. What is the importance of paradox? What he says, paradox, it's a language appropriate, inevitable to poetry. Means he says that paradox, the use of paradox is quite inevitable. Means one cannot avoid. In other words, in fact, we can say he extends his views by saying that the usage of paradox makes poetry more beautiful. In every good poetry, according to him, we find the usage of paradox. To support his opinion, he gives two examples. The first is a sonnet by William Wordsworth, and that is composed upon Westminster Bridge. There is a sonnet by William Wordsworth composed upon Westminster Bridge, and in this sonnet, according to Cleanth Brooks, what William Wordsworth is doing, that he is making the appropriate use of paradoxes. So to understand this, I would first like to give you a brief introduction to what is paradox. As a literary device, what do we understand by paradox? Try to understand this sentence. I always lie. I always lie. Now, if I always lie, then how can this statement be true? So what do you see? There is a contradiction in the statement. So this is all about paradox. When in a single statement you find the contradiction, still the statement is to be true. More examples we can take, like do the thing you think you cannot do. Do the thing that you think you cannot do. So now one way you are saying that do the thing, and in the other section you are saying that you cannot do. So how can you do a thing which you cannot do? Like earn money by spending it. You should earn money by spending it. So you are somewhere asking to earn the money, and on the other way you are asking that first you spend money. So that sort of things you find in paradox, like the child is the father of man, pretty common you see. So these are the examples of paradox. So now we move on to the same sonnet which I mentioned. In that sonnet, Wordsworth is talking about the industrial world in London. So remember the late 18th century when the industries developed in London, and that time the people shifted from the villages or the countryside to the city life. And we all know that William Wordsworth is a quite admirer of the rural life, the natural things, not the industrial or the scientific things. So here a contradiction we see. William Wordsworth is praising this industrial world in this sonnet. He is praising. And why he is praising now? He says that I love nature, I admire nature, and the man is the part of nature as well. And whatever the man is making, the man has developed, the man has built up this London, this industrial world. So whatever the man, the natural object man is making, should also be called as natural. So he is saying that this industrial world in London is natural. So one must appreciate this thing. So this is paradox according to Cleanth Brooks. Another example he takes, and that is from a poem Canonization by John Donne. First, what is canonization? To understand what is the meaning of word canon. Canon, something like top, an explosive weapon. And canonization, one meaning is that when a person in Christianity is given the sainthood, that is called as canonization. Okay, there are different meanings for canonization. One is that when a person one joins the category of these saints, he achieves or acquires the sainthood, that is canonization. And now what sort of things we see in this poem, that John Donne, he is calling his beloved to make physical love. And he says that when he and his beloved, they make physical love, then they will achieve that sainthood. They will become like a priest, or they will become as pure as any religious thing can be. So he is recommending, or he is arguing that one can achieve sainthood with this physical love, and he calls his physical love as a saintly love. So what sort of a saintly love could be? So that is can be called as one example of paradox. So these two examples are taken by Cleanth Brooks, remember, in his book to give his views about paradoxes. So one simple thing, he's saying that one should make the proper use of paradoxes to make the poetry look more beautiful. Now, to counter his views, we have one work by the writer R.S. Crane. The work is The Critical Monism of Cleanth Brooks. The Critical Monism of Cleanth Brooks. It is an essay, and in this work he says that whatever Brooks is saying about paradoxes, that is quite acceptable, but he is making a mistake, that he is simply ignoring what is the main thing behind any poetry, and that is imagination. The beautiful aspect of poetry is its rhythm, music, and all emotional things that a poet presents in the poetry. So what is his opinion of Cleanth Brooks? That paradoxes are acceptable, but one must not ignore the fundamental things of good poetry, that is imagination and other aspects we all know. And further he says that we all use paradoxes even in our day-to-day conversation. So thoroughly on the basis of paradoxes, if we say that poetry is becoming quite beautiful, it will be wrong. Then he takes one example. He takes the example of E equals to mc square, the scientific theory, E equal to mc square given by Einstein. I do not know much about science, so I cannot explain this, how there is the use of paradox in this statement. Energy is equal to mass into C, I do not know what does it mean, mc square. So just remember, R.S. Crane has given the example of this E is equal to mc square to say that the paradoxes are frequently used in scientific things and even in day-to-day conversations. But he is rejecting this fact that the poetry uniquely use paradoxes. That's all we have about this work, Language of Paradox. So remember these two names. The first, Language of Paradox, this book is written by Cleanth Brooks, and this view is his opinion of paradoxes is countered by R.S. Crane, and he used the example of E equals to mc square. The next work we have by Cleanth Brooks is The Well-Wrought Urn. It was published in the year 1947, and the subtitle to this poem, this work is Studies in the structure of poetry. Studies in the structure of poetry. And the title, The Well-Wrought Urn, is taken from the poem Canonization, which we have discussed in the previous section, and it is written by John Donne. And what he says in this work, he gives the concept of the heresy of paraphrase. Heresy of paraphrase. Let's come to the title first, that is well-wrought urn. Well, we all know, and wrought means shaped, of a good shape. Now, well-wrought means of a perfect shape. Urn means an object like a flower vase. In Hindi we can call it like a kalash or something. This object is used to store the ashes of a cremated or a dead person. So he's talking about in this book the concept of heresy of paraphrase. So in the title we have the meaning like a perfect object, something like flower vase. And he says that heresy of paraphrase is committed by most of the authors and critics, especially the critics. Why? What is heresy? Heresy means doing something wrong, especially against religion it is considered, but we can take it as a mistake, a huge mistake. And paraphrase, if you remember that in the school classes we used to paraphrase the given stanza, we used to write 1/3 of that stanza, means give the just the meaning in brief with 2-3 lines or in very short. So he says when you are paraphrasing something, you are doing heresy. So means you are doing something seriously wrong, you are making a mistake. It is crime to paraphrase because there are two things in any work. One is the content, we all know, the meaning, the plot or whatever in a story, the main thing that we understand. The second is the form, how it is written. So when you are paraphrasing, you are giving a brief, you can say, the explanation of that work, the content, but you are absolutely ruining the shape of that work or form, how the content is written. One example I give you. A few days back I went through the book that is 1984 by George Orwell. That the explanation of this book is also given in this YouTube channel. And when I went through that book, and after completing that book, I thought that I should give a brief introduction about and critical summary of this novel. And now if you go through that summary, there are 5 videos regarding this. You won't be able to find what sort of form in the work is. And I would say that if you can spare time, and then you can realize how great the form is of this work. In the summary or in whenever we are paraphrasing something, we focused more on the content, not on the form. Form means how it is written, how the things are presented. And this is the thing Cleanth Brooks is saying. To make a content beautiful, there are 2 things always. One is the content and second is the form. And form is equally important. So whenever you are paraphrasing a thing, you are making a crime. So that is why he says that it is heresy of paraphrasing. One must not do it. Further, Cleanth Brooks add that in the summary or in paraphrase we get only the plot. The form and content both are inseparable. We cannot separate them. Poetry is not a scientific thing. For scientific things, for such reports, you can paraphrase. But the emotions in the poetry which are expressed, how can you paraphrase? I gave you the brief introduction to Canonization, this poem, a few minutes back. And you actually do not know what is the form of this poem. When we read this poem, only then we can tell whether the poetry is good or bad, that particular poem, canonization. If we simply go by this meaning that in that poem there are only the particular concept is that writer is saying that he will achieve the sainthood with the physical love. This is the main summary or the content we can just take. But what about the form? In the poetry, the form makes the poetry more beautiful. So remember, Hersey of Paraphrase, the concept is given in the book, that is The Well Wrought On by Cleanth Brooks, and he is simply saying that do not make any sort of paraphrasing or summaries. Let the content be at its own. So content has to be there, so as form. Both are equally important. Apart from these two works, we have a few more work like Understanding Poetry, written by him in the year 1938. Then one more work, Modern Poetry and Tradition, published in the year 1939. And there is one more work, and that is Keats' Sylvan Historian, and it was published in the year 1944. Subtitle we can take as History Without Footnotes. History Without Footnotes. So that's all we have about Cleanth Brooks in this lesson, and now there are a few questions you can easily answer, I believe, if you have listened to this audio, I can say. First is Cleanth Brooks. He has given the concept of language of paradox. Language of paradox. Another, the idea of a heresy of paraphrasing is given by Cleanth Brooks. And one last question: who represented American Embassy in London? And the name is Cleanth Brooks. He represented America in London at cultural attaché. It must be like an office. So he represented America in Britain, in London. There is office, and okay, it may be a political post or something like. So that's it for this lesson. In the next lesson we shall take another critique, and thanks a lot for watching this lesson. Have a great day.